Okay, so we're going to start the Parashas Behar. So we saw a little message about this from actually this first Rashi from Rav Shachter yesterday. So I'll share with you what he said. But first, let's look at the Rashi. Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Behar Sinai Lemor. Hashem spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai. What does Rashi say? Rashi says, "Here, grab a chumash, Akiva. Grab a chumash." Where? Oh, yeah. Rashi says, Ma'inyan Shemitah Itzel Har Sinai. What's the relationship? Because it says God spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai, and then there's the mitzvah of Shemitah. But the mitzvah of Shemitah has nothing to do with Mount Sinai. I mean, why is specifically the mitzvah of Shemitah connected to Mount Sinai? Good. Hello, Mordechai. Hello, Aviva. So he says, weren't all the mitzvahs said at Sinai? To teach us that just like Shemitah was said with its generalities and its specifics at Sinai, so too all of the laws were said in their generalities and their specifics at Sinai. That's what it says in Torah's Kohanim. But now this is very important, Rashi. He says, and it seems to me, Shekach Pirusha, that this is the explanation, because we don't find Shemitah's Karkos Shenishnes Ba'aravos Moav. We don't find the passage of the sabbatical year repeated in the plains of Moab in the book of Deuteronomy. A lot of the Torah was repeated when Moshe repeated the Torah to the Jewish people, but the laws of Shemitah are not said there. So therefore, we're learning here that the generalities and the specifics were all said at Sinai, and the Torah here is teaching us that every word that was said to Moshe, Rashi seems to be saying that all of the rules were said at Sinai and repeated on the plains of Moab. That's what Rashi seems to be saying. But I want to quote from Rav Shachter, because we were studying Rav Shachter in Pirkei Avos, and he gave a slightly different reading. Rav Shachter said the following yesterday. He says as follows. He says, this is what Rav Shachter writes. One should not make the error of thinking that the concept of Torah Sinai means that the text of Torah as we have it is the same as the text that was dictated to Moshe at Sinai. Meaning the Torah states explicitly that the text of the Torah is in fact a composite of three different texts. Some were given at Sinai, some at Ol Moed, and some in the plains of Moab. So Moshe received three different texts of the mitzvos. And at the conclusion of the 40 years in the desert, Hashem had to tell Moshe which of the three should be recorded in which parasha. That's a little bit slightly different than this Rashi. So, I mean, we'd have to understand how Rav Shachter would explain this Rashi, but it's a little bit different than this Rashi. Okay, so now, because this Rashi says everything was said and then repeated. Yes, Mordechai. Yeah. Rav Shachter cites the Chazon Ish, and it does make sense. What he's saying does make sense, but it does seem a little, I never heard it before from a rabbi. Okay, we're up to verse 2, and we have a big honor of studying with Abby, because Abby is preparing for her bat mitzvah, but she's really not preparing for her bat mitzvah. What she's really doing is preparing to be a Jew. She's already a Jew, but she's preparing to be a good Jew. A good Jew is somebody who follows the Torah. That's what it means to be a good Jew. So here we say, Shabbos LaHashem, speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, Ki tavo al haaretz, when you come to the land, asher ani nosein lachem, that I will give to you, v'shavsa haaretz Shabbos LaHashem. The land will rest. The land will have a Shabbos to Hashem. How will the land have a Shabbos? What do you say to that, Abby? How will the land have a Shabbos? Yeah, so that's The simple meaning, very good, Abby, that means that the farmers won't work the land. So the farmers won't work the land. That's what it says. Shabbat Hashem was Shem Hashem. Just like it says in the beginning of Bereshit. Meaning to say that just like every 7 days, hello Elon, just like every 7 days we have a Shabbos for Hashem, so too every 7 year there's a Shabbos for the land. Now, Sheish Shanim Tizra Sadecha, 6 years you have to sow your field. Sheish Shanim Tizmor Karmecha, 6 years you can prune your vineyard. It's almost like this is a commandment that you have to work. There were no kollels in the time of the Torah. Not only that, there are no yeshivas in the Torah. There are no synagogues in the Torah. So, right. Rashi says that Yaakov studied there, but there was never, I'm saying explicit in the Torah. So all we see in the Torah is like an injunction to work. 6 years you shall sow your field, 6 years you shall prune your vineyard, and you gathered your crops. No Rashi. Uvashana Shvi is in the 7th year, Shabbos Shabboson Yel Aretz. The 7th year will be a Shabbos for the land. Shabbos LaShem, a Shabbos for God. Sadacha lo tizra, the karmecha lo tizmor. Your field you shall not sow, and your vineyard you shall not prune. So in the 7th year, there will be a sabbatical for the land. For the fields and the vineyards. What's the purpose of this? Rashi doesn't say. What's the purpose of the sabbatical for the land? I understand why you have to rest on Shabbos. What's the purpose of the sabbatical for the land? What would people here say? Torah doesn't tell us the purpose. Torah never tells us the purpose.
It's the environment. It's the first time that we see a real caring for the environment.
I agree with you to a point that it elevates the environment, but we do see earlier actually you're right, it might be the first time, but we see later on in the Torah that you're not allowed to cut down a fruit-bearing tree when you go out to war. So one of the theories is exactly like what Seth is saying, that it's to take care of the environment. That it's basically to make the meaning to say in what way does it elevate the environment, Seth? What's your thinking?
Hasn't there been theories that, or I'm not even in farming, but
right.
Like sometimes I say, oh, pig is not good anyway because it would, really actually turns out. So does the land actually rest? Isn't it systematically better when the land is rested?
So that's one of the theories that, I mean, now they don't do it. Farmers don't do that anymore. But in the time of the Torah, that one of the theories was you have to let the land rest a little so it could be stronger. So maybe that's one theory. It's about the land resting. Another theory is that it's not about the land resting so much as the farmer resting. The farmer needs to, just like on Shabbos, the farmer should be stopping to work, and everybody has to, take time to recognize it's Shabbos. 1 year out of 7 years, the farmer should stop working. And what's he supposed to do? He's supposed to study Torah. He's supposed to go to yeshiva and study Torah so he can come closer to Hashem, work on the spiritual. So, okay. Verse 5. Eis sefiach ketzircha lo tiktzor. Ves in vain nizirecha lo sivtzor shna shabboson yel aretz. What does this mean? The sefiach. What's the sefiach? Is the aftergrowth of your harvest you cannot harvest, and the aftergrowth of your grapes you cannot pick. It has to be a sabbatical year for the land. Let's see what Rashi says. Let's say you didn't plant it. Let's say it just grew on its own. You're still not supposed to harvest it. You're not supposed to do a big harvest, even if you didn't plant it. What does it mean when it says you can't harvest it? It doesn't mean you can't harvest it at all. It means you can't harvest it to take possession of it like other harvests. So it shall be ownerless for everything. So the question I want to just say is, are you allowed to eat from the fruits of the sabbatical year? If the fruit grows in the 7th year, are you allowed to eat it? Yeah. In fact, according to Nachmanides, it's a mitzvah to eat it. You just have to know how to eat it. How can you eat it? You can't harvest it in order to keep it for long or to sell it. You have to harvest only what you need to eat, and you can only eat it up to a certain point. So yes, it can be harvested, but only in a certain manner. She says, okay, Nizirecha, you should not harvest the grapes of your Nazir. Rashi says Nazir means the ones that you separated from, you kept away. You kept people from away from them, So now we see another potential purpose of the sabbatical year. What's another potential purpose of the sabbatical year? What are you supposed to do with the fruits of your land? Abby, you know what? Let's say there are fruits growing in your land. What are you supposed to do? Are you allowed to put a lock on your field and say you can't come in? No, you're not allowed to do that. Correct. So what do you have to do? Who's allowed to eat the fruits of the sabbatical year that grow in your field? Who's allowed to eat the fruits? Who? Exactly. Anybody can eat them. The field becomes ownerless in that year. In essence, what we're saying is that once every 7 years, the playing field is, so to speak, the playing field is leveled, and the poor and the rich have the same access to food. And that's the idea, that there's like almost socialism once every 7 years. What were you saying, Akiva? They can't come on your land and build a house, but they can come on your land and pick the fruits. But in the Jubilee year, the land goes back to its original owner. So anybody who became a real estate tycoon is going to lose all his property. So basically, all the people who just are in real estate, they're out. And come the sabbatical year, and come the Jubilee year, their wealth is going to be gutted. They might not have bought it for as much, but you can't keep your money in real estate. So what are you going to keep your money in then? Gold or something. But that's it. I mean, you're not going to be able to just pass the real estate down from generation to generation. It's going to be gutted every 50 years and go back to its original owner. So another possible reason, this is a third possible suggestion for what's the purpose of the sabbatical year, is to make economic equality. Yeah, what were you gonna say? A reset. Yeah, it's not. It's. I would say it's not as hard a reset as the Jubilee year, but once every 7 years, everybody has the same access to food. Well, it's not capitalistic, right? Yeah, it's socialistic. It's socialism.
Right. You really build up.
Right. So this is why I know one person is a very, very successful businessman. And he said to me when he studied, he was about Teshuvah. And he said when he started studying about the Jubilee year and the Shemitah year, he knew for sure that the Torah was written by God and not man. Because he said no poor man would ever give this much to like you have to wait 50 years and it's only once every 7 years. And no rich man would ever give the poor people anything like that. So it's clearly the case that it was that only God could have written this. That's what my friend said. I remember that. He told that to me like 20 years ago. Anyway, low tip sore, you can't pick these grapes. Rashi says, Otame and Chabotzer Elmena Mufkar. You can only pick it from the ones that have been relinquished. It's your job to say, your responsibility to say, anybody who wants to can pick my fruits this year. Is there another society in the world that says such a thing, that's ever done such a thing? Anybody know? In Rwanda, do they do that? The fields are open?
Why is it specified in 7 years? The first question, and the second, like, does it apply to
Okay, so it's two excellent questions. Does it why 7 years? The Torah doesn't tell us why specifically, but in the same way, it doesn't tell us why. It says the Shabbos is on the 7th day, so it's to remind us of the Shabbos. And the Kabbalistic theory is that 7 is the holy number, and so therefore it's the conclusion of a cycle. Does it apply to any other business other than the land. So we said, first of all, in the Jubilee year, the land goes back, but does it apply in any other business? So the answer is, exactly, the answer is very good, Elon, that all the loans are also forgiven. That's further evidence that this is to create social equality. And on top of that, it's not in the sabbatical year, but every 6 years, after 6 years, a Hebrew slave goes free. So there is this concept of these efforts that are done in order to create social equality. It would be like what's going on in this country with student loans. Imagine if every 6 years, all the loans, any mortgages you had would be forgiven. The issue is we don't do that because even in the Torah, even in the Jewish tradition, the rabbis realize this is not viable anymore, and the rabbis created a workaround this system. Now they also created a workaround the sabbatical with the land, but that's much more controversial because there are many Jews who are not farmers, but almost all Jews borrow money or loan money at some point in their life, so it'd be impossible to do the sabbatical year for loans. Yes.
You don't know I read it, but I've read that it's an obligation that after 7 years of working, you have to take off 1 year according to Torah. I don't know.
So that's not actually technically the law, but what I was saying is that if the idea of the sabbatical year is that in the 7th year you have to take a break and take like a sabbatical and spend more time that year on the study of Torah, but it's not an actual commandment. No, it's just symbolically related, but not technically. So now we're up to verse 6. This sabbatical year for you will be to eat, for you, for your slaves, for your maids. This speaks to the social equality. Everybody can get to this field. For you, for your workers, everybody's got a holiday. Rashi says, even though I forbade the fruits of the 7th year to you, I did not forbid them with respect to eating, with respect to benefit and eating. This is the most important line. You're not allowed to act, and this is another possible theory for the mitzvah. You're not allowed to act in the 7th year like you're the Baal Habayis. What's the Baal Habayis? Like you're the boss. Like you're the boss. You can't act like you're the boss. Who's our boss? We got one boss. Who's the boss? Hashem. That we sometimes might be thinking that we're the boss. We're the CEO. We own the land. We're the majority shareholder. We've got the portfolio. So every 7th year, Hashem says, you can't act like you're the boss. I call you Shavamba. You and your hired worker and one who lives with you. Mean to say, you hire a guy who's undocumented worker. He's coming in. You pay him like a cash wage. That year, everybody's the same. Nobody's above it. Everybody's the same. This is what the Torah is saying. That's literally what Rashi's saying. Literally what Rashi's saying. Could you imagine if we had that type of equality in this country? Can you imagine how different the world would be? Shabbos haaretz lachem le'acha. The land will be for you a land of rest to eat. Min hashavuta ta'achel v'yat tochel min hashamur. This is teaching us a very important law that if the field was watched, let's say somebody took his field, put up a fence around the sabbatical year, and then harvested it, you're not allowed to eat it. This is what's so controversial today in Israel during the sabbatical year, that there are large segments of the Orthodox Jewish community called Haredim who will not eat the food that's grown in the sabbatical year, even though the Rav Kook said it's okay as long as you employ a mechanism like Heter Mechira, which was basically similar to in concept like the sale of chametz. So it came a workaround, and the Haredim don't eat that fruits and vegetables because they say you're not allowed to eat it. So what do they eat? Well, they used to. That's expensive. They used to eat from the Palestinians. That's where they would get it from. So they would get their fruits from the Palestinians and from Gaza and stuff. Now it's probably going to be slightly more complex how you could get that, because I don't have to tell you why. That will be for you and your servants. Rashi says, because it says, the destitute of your people shall eat. The destitute. What does the destitute mean? The poor. The poor people shall eat it. I might think that the rich people cannot eat it. It says the verse, everybody is eating it together. The owners, the slaves, and the slave women. Rashi says, even the non-Jews. So let's just pause for a moment. Here we have the supreme book of the Jewish people telling us that if a person is the wealthiest Jew in the land, he's the biggest farmer, that year he's equal to the non-Jews. That's what the Torah is saying. Everybody. The person comes across the border. He comes in from Mexico and he's in our fields. He has the same rights that year as me. I'm a full citizen. I've been owning that land for 40 years. We have the same rights to the food that year. Can you imagine what kind of revolutionary statement this is making? Can you imagine that? Of course, it's a commodity. It was the commodity. It was the commodity. Yeah, were you raising your hand, John? There was no gluten-free diets back then. It was just grain. It was just grain. That's what they eat. They ate wheat and a little bit of barley, but barley was animal food, so they had the wheat. That's what else did they eat? Yes, John. Yeah, the bread basket.
No, I'm serious. Did they get their gluten-free bagels from how to connect Ukraine is one of the biggest.
Okay, so we go on. So now verse 7 states, not only the people, not only the poor, even the animals. This goes to what Seth was saying. Maybe it's about the environment. For the domesticated animals, that's the sheep, the cattle, the goats, and for the undomesticated animals that are in your land, all your crops should be to eat. For the domesticated and the undomesticated, meaning say you have to leave your farm open to the wild animals. So what's this Rashi teaching? What does this verse teach us? Rashi says, if it's telling us that an undomesticated, let's say a deer, can eat it, for sure your animals can eat from it because you have to feed them, generally speaking. So why does it say for your animals? To compare an animal, the two types of animals, and it's to tell us that as long as, this is the key point, how long are you allowed to eat the crops that you harvest and bring into your house? As long as the undomesticated animals, like the deer, for example, are still eating from the crops in the field, then you can feed your animal from the house. And once the animals in the field have stopped eating that food, meaning it's all gone, you can't feed it to the animals in your house, and you also can't feed it to yourself. So you're only allowed to eat it basically till the end of the season. Once that season's over, you're done with it. Now, this is all well and good for us today, but back then they could store the grain, but other stuff, I guess that's it. I mean, they had to store from the 6th year and last till, that's what Rashi, the Torah is going to tell us. And if you say, what am I going to do? God is going to give us so much in the 6th year that'll be enough to last. Yeah, people were skeptical. Very nice that Joseph saved it in Egypt. He started this idea, which doesn't seem so creative and novel. Like it's pretty basic. Put some away for tomorrow. Save some for a rainy day. Your rainy day fund, your reserves. Right? Okay. Then the verse says, "V'safar tolecha sheva shapto shanim sheva shanim sheva pamim," and you need to count 7 cycles of 7 years, 7 times, and that will make it 49 years. Rashi says, "Shmitot shanim." You need to count 7 cycles of 7, and this will be even though you have not yet kept the sabbatical years, you have to do the Jubilee year at the end of 49 years. And the simple meaning of the verse is that the total years of the Shemitas will add up to 49 years. Now, let me ask you a question. And by the way, the Jubilee year is for sure about social equality. We have the Liberty Bell coming up. But let me ask you a question. Do we observe the Jubilee year today? We do sabbatical years. Do we do also Jubilee years? So there is no observance of the Jubilee year, and we just came across that in the Daf Yomi a couple of days ago. The Jubilee year is no longer applicable, and the reason is because the majority of Jews are not living in the land of Israel. It's getting very close. But they used to say that was the reason. Everybody used to say that. But there's another reason, because even if the majority of the Jews are living in the land, we also have to know who comes from which tribe, because or else you can't return the land to its original owners. Imagine if they figured out a person proves, I'm from the tribe of God, give me this. Well, God's on the other side, but he says, I'm from the tribe of Binyamin, I claim this. That would be great. The refugees demanding their rights. Okay, so all right, we'll stop here and Daven Mincha. Beautiful to study. We're up to